The Cat Lady. What Lurks Behind the Shed? An original short story, written and read by Miss Worm. In a forgotten part of Sussex lies Raccoon Woods, an ancient tangle of trees and superstition, where devils and monsters are as numerous as the oaks and ashes in which they are said to dwell. Deep in the heart of the woods, the trees huddle together as if even they are nervous, and the sunlight surrenders to leaf-layered twilight as the birds grow silent. Those that stray from the path talk of strange creatures that can only be seen from the corner of your eye, of unearthly whispered sounds, and of tracks left by neither man nor beast. The older village folk merely nod and change the subject when they hear these stories. They know better than to draw attention to the woods and those that are said to live within. My family has dwelt in the village of Rackham for generations, so the woods hold no fear for me. In my youth, I lost many a day beneath that Stygian canopy, tracking the wildlife and watching the birds. But then university and Oxford called, and I was not to return for 20 years. A single road passes through the woods, and when the trees are at their most impenetrable, you will see 2 high iron gates, flanked by towering brick walls, the entrance to the sprawling Gothic monstrosity that is Oakridge Psychiatric Hospital. Edward Evans had been at Oakridge for 30 years when I took up my position as Head Psychiatrist. My predecessor, Dr. Walton, handed me a box of files on his final day and said, "I suggest you take these home and read them. Our most unusual cases. Make sure you have the lights on and a strong drink in your glass, especially for Evans." My ears pricked up at the hint of mystery, but he gave no more clues. "Better yet, I'll come round and fill you in. Next Thursday? About 8, all right?" It was Wednesday evening before I had time to sit down with Dr. Walton's box of notes. I sorted through the papers and picked up the file for Evans. Until his breakdown, the highly intelligent, well-educated Edward Evans had shown no signs of mental illness. His childhood was normal and unremarkable. He had been in full-time employment since leaving university, where he excelled at English. Apart from a fixation on his dead mother and a tendency to religious mania, he was suffering from extreme allurophobia, a pronounced fear of cats. It was not that common a problem. More usual is the fear of dogs. Indeed, I myself am extremely wary of dogs, those dark, beady eyes and hot, snarling mouths with dripping teeth. Tucked inside the folder was an old cassette tape. Patient sessions are now recorded on computer, but back then the hospital was still using C90 cassettes. As far as I could see, there were only 2 such tapes amongst Dr. Walton's files, Evans number 307 and a loose one marked Professor Carew, July 81. Fortunately, my stereo system still possesses its tape deck, and I loaded up the cassette and pressed play. Apart from some distortion here and there, the recording was in good shape for something that my younger colleagues would insist on listing as vintage. I fast-forwarded through the usual preambles.
I don't understand why I'm still here.
"How have you been getting on with your writing therapy?" asked Dr. Walton. I listened to a few minutes of swearing as I made notes. "This happened on Halloween, didn't it?"
What? Yes. It started about 8 o'clock. Is this really necessary? I've said all this to the police. Those blasted kids from Willow Lane have been pestering me all evening, banging on the door, shouting trick or treat through the letterbox. They didn't give me a moment's peace. Then they swear at you when you don't give them what they want. My mother wouldn't have stood for that sort of behaviour. Well, I soon got fed up with all their nonsense and went out the back to put the kettle on. I hadn't yet closed the curtains, and although it was dark, the whiteness of the snow made everything perfectly visible. I couldn't quite make out what I was seeing. At first, I thought the snow was playing tricks with my eyes, but then I realised all my plants had been uprooted, even the roses my mother had planted. I ran outside and must have stood there for some minutes. Just stood there with the snow falling on me and me in my slippers. I thought one of the kids had come over the wall to pay me back for not answering the door. That was when I saw it. Well, at first I thought it was the cat from next door. People have them as pets. Can you believe it? Pets. In their houses. They don't understand. Why won't they listen? Devils. Devils.
You're perfectly safe here.
They're coming. You fools. They're here. They're here. They've been asleep all along, and now they're awake. They're awake. We must do something. They won't do anything. They're all in on it. Doctors. Police. Everyone. Him. He's one. Ah!
I rewound the tape and listened to it twice more, but I gleaned nothing further. I sat back in my chair and wondered what Dr. Walton would say when he visited the following day. Hello, Dr. Walton. How's retirement treating you? Glad to be out of the rat race? I took him into the study and poured a generous measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler for him, before adding a slosh to my mug. It's only been 4 days. Still, wife hasn't killed me yet, so that's something, I suppose. Did you get a chance to read the Evans file? I did, but to be frank, I didn't think there was anything particularly unusual. Ah, he gestured to the carrier bag he'd handed me on the doorstep. I'd rather hoped it contained a box of chocolates, but upon closer inspection, I discovered a bundle of tatty exercise books. Evans writing therapy, he said. I gave him a disapproving look. This really shouldn't leave the hospital premises. He raised an eyebrow and stared meaningfully at the files on my desk. Point taken. Mind if I light my pipe? Not at all. My father used to smoke a pipe. Did he? Did he indeed? That's very interesting. And how does that make you feel? Oh, shut up. Well, you haven't come out on a rainy night to psychoanalyse me. Tell me about Evans. There's obviously more to it. I watched his hands as he filled his pipe, carefully selecting the fragrant shreds of tobacco before he pressed them into the bowl. His tamper caught the light, sending sparkling beams skittering across the wall like silver butterflies. Pass me those exercise books, he said, and I dragged my attention back to my guest. Got yourself a drink? You'll need it. Unfortunately, the majority of his records were lost in a fire, but these notebooks of his, these survived. A fire? Did one of the patients? No. They think it was rats. Well, something got in and chewed through a wire. He shuffled through the notebooks and picked one out. The red cover was scuffed and stained with curled-up edges from repeated readings. For an instant I was transported back to school and the unmistakable smell of hot classrooms stuffed with bored teenagers. You've listened to the tape? I nodded. Here we are then. If you recall, Evans is standing in the garden. I remember the whiteness of the snow as it fell. It had begun to settle, and already the garden was disappearing into an unfamiliar world of indistinct, distorted forms. The tattered remains of my plants lay strewn about, their dying leaves already turning black from cold, already rotting as they gave up the last of their life force. I was upset about my mother's roses the most. New bushes could replace them, but it wouldn't be her hands which dug into the earth and planted them, nor would I ever share the same sweet perfume that she had once enjoyed. A suffocating cloud of despair fell upon me, my mind dwelling on the idea that her blood
unnoticed on a thorn, had dried in the summer sun to then be absorbed by the plant itself. I fell to my knees in the snow and gathered the plants to my chest. The thorns pricked me and tore at my skin, but I delighted in it. Every drop of crimson that stained the snow, a reminder that I, too, was of my mother's blood. But then, that innate sixth sense which remains in all of us lifted the hackles on my neck. I was being watched. Someone, somewhere, was watching. I turned my head slowly, and from the corner of my eye, I saw the easy, languorous stretch of an animal rising from sleep. A large, black tom. But no, this was too substantial for a cat, and no dog ever moved thus. It occurred to me that it was the vandal, the snubbed trick-or-treater, the desecrator of my plants, and that his bizarre cat-like appearance was caused by a Halloween costume. I was about to shout a rebuke when he turned towards me. We locked eyes, and my soul quivered. This was no child in fancy dress. His eyes burnt into the darkness, catching what light there was and turning it to flame. His sleek coat rose until he grew to twice his size, and behind him his tail trembled, as thick as a man's arm, but as lithe and mobile as a snake covered in silken hair. My reason rebelled against the thought, but as those eyes seared into mine, it dawned on me that I was staring at a fiendish hybrid, some devilish mixture of cat and human, awoken on this heathen night, and secure in the ungodly paganism of All Hallows' Eve, free to walk abroad. Kneeling there, surrounded by blood-spattered snow, the full malignant potency of that unholy festival pressed upon me. My senses must have failed me in my shock, for I suddenly realised that the beast had gone without my noticing. I struggled to my feet and staggered towards the place where he had rested. My feet and legs were numb from cold, and my hands and arms still bled from the thorns, but I paid them no heed. I must find the beast and destroy it. He had lain in the lee of the woodshed, and a patch of snowless earth soon showed me where. I felt the ground. Yes, it was still warm. I had not been insensible for any real length of time. Tracks led away to the rear of the wood store. The impressions were like nothing I had ever seen. They were the size and shape of a man's foot, and with a man's heel, but ending with the 4 rounded toes of a cat's paw. Sunk deep into the snow, they left distinctive imprints for me to follow. Quickly, I made my way behind the shed. The footprints, paw prints, whatever they were, ended in a dense patch of brambles and briars between the shed and the back wall. I examined the brickwork. There was no sign the beast had scrambled over. No scratches from claws, and the freshly fallen snow lay undisturbed on the top. I grabbed a stick and stabbed amongst the brambles. The briars ripped at my clothes, and my skin suffered yet more gashes, but I was determined to beat the tangle back. The ground beneath was trampled flat, as if many feet had been there. The first needles of fear pricked at me. Was there more than one beast? What devilment had I stumbled upon? In the distance, the church clock struck 11. So late already. Only 1 hour left of this accursed Halloween. I doubled my efforts and drove the briars back, toiling until my sweat turned icy in the frigid air. There, tight against the edge of the shed and burrowing beneath, was a yawning hole. Had I discovered the monster's lair? I rocked back on my heels and thought. I was ill-equipped to tackle these creatures. My shirt sleeves were drenched and icy, my slippers sodden by the snow, and perhaps more importantly, I had no weapon. In a fevered hurry, I sprinted back to the house, whereupon I changed my clothes and fetched a torch. After a moment's hesitation, I unlocked my mother's bureau. My father's old service revolver was safely inside, untouched since the war. It had been kept as an insurance policy against invaders. Well, what was this if not an invasion, or at least a potential one? The Webley was reassuringly solid in my hand and bolstered my courage. I had been in the house for not yet 5 minutes and had kept watch, as much as I was able, on the back of the shed from the windows. The creature had not surfaced, from that entrance to its burrows at any rate. A glance at the clock showed me it was already 20 to 12. How could this be? The church clock had surely only just struck 11. Had I not heard it with my own ears? I glanced again. 10 to 12. Could these devils alter time? Were they speeding up the night to thwart me in my mission to destroy them? Every moment was vital, and I rushed from the house, torch in hand and revolver tucked into waistband. The snow had continued to fall in my absence. It was thick and unyielding against my feet, and it had covered all evidence of the demon's vandalism. Even my blood, those crimson drops of life, had disappeared beneath the blanket of white. I had no time to waste and hurried to the end of the garden to confront the monster in his den. The brambles were as I had left them, though the snow had covered the tracks on the trampled earth. I scraped it away with shivering hands until the hole was exposed again. No more than the width of a man's shoulders, the torchlight revealed a tunnel leading beneath the shed. I pressed my ear to its entrance. From deep within came the scrabbling of movement, and to my horror, the unmistakable sound of young mewling. My heart raced faster than it has ever done before, and I was half inclined to turn tail and flee. Yet what of the world if I let these monstrosities live? Pushing the torch before me, I squeezed my head and shoulders into the hole. The entrance was beaten earth, but as I shuffled my way farther through that god-forsaken passage, my torchlight illuminated the walls. They were covered with newspaper, scavenged no doubt from nearby dustbins, and plastered against the tunnel sides. It was too dark to make out the dates, but the headlines told me all I needed to know. Close by the entrance, I saw recent news, but with each foot I descended, I travelled back in time. I passed the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Falklands War, the assassination of Kennedy, the coronation of Elizabeth. All were pasted there. A cold sweat leapt to my brow. This tunnel, this den, was decades old. The air grew warmer as I writhed and twisted my way down. Stomach and back both crammed against the tunnel, and the crisp scent of snow was replaced by the sweetness of milk, but a milk that had been tainted with a strange, fish-like odour. A wretched snuffling and suckling came from nearby. My stomach turned, and I muttered the Lord's Prayer. I couldn't risk discovery, so I switched off my torch and continued on my ghastly journey in the pitch black. They were the worst minutes of my life. At last, I felt the tunnel ease its pressure on my shoulders as it widened. The stench of contaminated milk assailed my senses. It enveloped me, pressing against my skin and burrowing deep within my nostrils. Wet sounds accompanied the warmth, a contented puling and sucking. Within this came a rhythmic, rasping scrape. Panic rose in my chest. My breathing grew laboured, and it was all I could do to not be violently, hideously sick. I could take the darkness no more, and I flicked on my torch. Its beam revealed a large cavern, again lined with newspapers, and a page declaring victory in Europe faced me, though I scarcely took it in. In front of me, not 6 feet away from my prone, defenceless form, was a monstrous beast. The size of a small woman, it lay in a bed of dried grasses, blinking rapidly against the unexpected light. Smooth, tawny fur covered its cat-like form, all save for the head and hands. Its face turned towards me, and it was the face of a woman, soft and rosy, with human eyes of green. Her hands, human in every detail, held a smaller creature. I had surprised her in the act of licking it clean. Her tongue, pale pink in the torchlight, was grotesquely long and covered with hooked white barbs. She had no covering, and with rising alarm I realised the origin of the noises I had heard. From her 6 human breasts, she was suckling her young. I cried out in fear, and her abominable offspring ceased in their mewling and faced me. 6 of them, all with different atrocities upon them. Some had the faces of human children. Others had human bodies but the head of a cat. My hand scrambled for my gun, but it wasn't there. It must have fallen from my pocket in the tunnel. The Catwoman growled, and her vile progeny bared their appalling fangs. Her kittens scattered, and she stalked towards me, tail swishing in the torchlight, as if I were a mouse. My fingers clawed frantically at the earth as I retreated feet first up the tunnel. Earth trickled from the roof of the burrow as I crashed against it in my fury to escape. Was I to be buried alive with these horrors? I scrabbled on, and with her eyes fixed on mine, those dreadful burning eyes, she retrieved her terrible brood and slunk back to the chamber. Finally, I reached the sweet air of God's blessed creation, and as I stumbled away, the church struck 12. I fell into the snow and was found there some hours later. There was no sign of the black beast I had first seen. There must be another way out of their warren.
Dr. Walton closed the exercise book. "What do you make of that?" I looked up from my notes. My immediate thought is he's suffered some sort of medical episode and became delirious after falling in the snow. It would explain the sensation of lost time. Walton nodded. "Is there any local folklore that may have influenced him? I understand your family has been in this area for a very long time." "Yes, we've been here for generations." I sipped my drink slowly and returned my mug to the table, where it caught the doctor's eye. "Milk? Got yourself a stomach ulcer? Midnight? Already? I feel like I've only just got here. Well, I must be off. I hope I haven't given you nightmares. Nothing worse than a bad night's sleep. Don't worry, a full 8 hours has never been for me. I much prefer to nap." I stood up, making sure my sleeves were pulled well down past my wrists. "Well, good night then, Dr. Felix. Enjoy your evening." My eyes strayed to the ball of wool in the corner. "Oh, I shall."